Hi, I'm Spencer from Cocoa Runners, and we're here to explain the foundations of this specialty coffee and craft chocolate subscription with James. And we're going to pick, from the craft chocolate perspective, two amazing bars. The first is a bar from Taza in the States, which, for reasons we'll go into, is basically the bridge between when chocolate was drunk to when we started to eat chocolate in the form of bars. And the second is from a fantastic guy called Jeff Steinberg, who crafts and grows his chocolate in Uganda.
And our selection, coffee-wise, is foundational too. We're going to be using red brick. Now, you might be concerned thinking that red brick is our kind of espresso blend, and maybe you don't have an espresso machine, but that isn't how it works. You can brew any coffee any way you want and have a great experience. So today, even though red brick is an espresso blend, we're going to be starting with filter coffee. We've just brewed this as filter coffee for tasting, and we can talk through a little bit more about the flavor, the experience, and how they pair so well.
So Taza was made by Alex and Kathleen Whitmore up in Somerville, Massachusetts, so very close to all those university towns. And it's distinctive in that it's stone ground. So it harkens back to the 1840s when chocolate was drunk, made into drinks through things called cakes. And then people worked out how to start making it into bars by adding some cocoa butter to this process. But it's not what we call conched and ground. So it's very, very grainy, but it's very delicious, and it has all sorts of complex flavor notes. It's crafted from beans grown Pisa in Haiti, so very, very different. As you can sort of tell, it looks very different. And if we just give it a little snap, I'm going to give James a piece here. Excuse my hands, but they are clean. Give it a good sniff, get a good feel for it. It's slightly boozy.
Yeah, there's some nice fruit on that.
Yeah, there's some very nice, it's sort of, you know, and it's also the texture of it. Just when you just get the texture, you immediately sort of think, what's going on here? So just trying a little bit of it. Sort of quite grainy. I'm going to use a slightly strange word. To me, it's always slightly banana-y and slightly sort of, almost sort of winey notes, red winey notes, and a bit vegetal.
It's very aromatic. It's almost floral, but it's not floral. It's like fruit and floral as one.
It is sort of when you're going down to it.
It fills your head up very nicely, but the texture is also so different to what you might anticipate from craft chocolate.
Yeah, it's not your classic smooth, finely ground conched chocolate. This is stone ground. So it's made in the same style that if you go to places like Mexico or even Modica or bits of Spain, you will buy this chocolate, but to make hot chocolate out of. But what Alex and Kathleen have managed to do is turn it into a fascinating experience. Now, you probably don't want to gobble a whole bar of this at one time, but to savor and to try it with some coffee, I think is absolutely phenomenal. So should we take a sip of this amazing go-to coffee?
Now, the challenge sometimes is to kind of pick something foundational, because specialty coffee, the big idea behind it is massive diversity. So where do you start? And for us, red brick is trying to do all the things that we think are the most important things that should be present in every specialty coffee. It should have a really nice sweetness. It should be an absence of bitterness, an absence of any harshness or astringency in there, a little bit of those kind of caramel notes that feel very lovely, but just enough acidity to make the whole thing kind of come alive. And that's where I think there's a really nice interplay where, you know, this, for me, kind of emphasizes a little bit more fruit in the coffee, because your brain's kind of primed for that kind of fruitiness by a bar like this. But then as you go back, the finish kind of is a little softer. It kind of softens it into those kind of caramel, browner tones that I think work really well.
Yeah, it's those sort of brownie notes that you were sort of saying. I mean, I think we've talked a lot in the past about how you should think about flavor and what you should look for. And what I've always loved about red brick is that it has what you've described as sort of blick. It's the sort of wine term, the balance, the length, the intensity, the complexity. You go on a journey with flavor. And I think one of the most important things is, as you sort of said, is that you don't have any of those harsh notes, those jarring notes, which you're not expecting. Now, to an extent, this chocolate, let's be candid, it is going to jar a little bit because you're not going to be expecting that texture. But it helps you just think a little bit about the flavor wave, which we developed with James and with Rebecca and with Barry. And it gets you to start thinking about the vocab you need. I think one other important point is that much as we get these perceptions, these flavor notes, we don't expect everybody else to get those flavor notes.
Absolutely not. I think flavor in many ways is quite a personal thing. It's quite a subjective experience. What this cup of coffee reminds you of will be dependent on what you've experienced in your life. So yeah, while I could say there's a little caramel in here and there's a little bit of sort of soft, slightly red fruit in there too, you may not experience that. It may trigger a different thought in your mind of, okay, no, that kind of reminds me a little bit more of red apples than it does of red berries. And that's completely valid. For me, the exciting and the enjoyable part of this is that kind of little journey you go on. You know, like you might have some intensity here at the start and it softens and it sort of fades out into a nice long finish. This for me is a different kind of wave.
Yep.
It just keeps going and going and building and building and building through the first few moments, and then it softens down the back and it kind of evolves.
I think that's one of the, it's one of the great parallels with any great food, is that on the one hand, what's releasing the flavor are the tannins and the heat in your mouth, which both chocolate and coffee clearly have. And then chocolate has a slight advantage because it's got cocoa butter, which sort of gets stuck in your mouth, which is the reason why this chocolate sort of lasts for so long. And with the coffee, actually, it combines and it releases it. But it is basically, remember that as you're sort of going through the wave, what is happening is that initially it's the heat from your mouth or the heat from the coffee, which is actually releasing all of that flavor. But then later, it's the biochemistry. It's your sort of, oral microbiome, to use one of those fashionable phrases, which releases some of those flavors, which will be different between us, but hopefully you will get them, because what you're looking for is a length of a journey. What you don't want is just a sudden spike. If you're just getting a sudden spike, that's either just sugar or salt or fat or something like that. What you want is this journey.
Yeah. For me, one of my favorite things with tasting is comparative tasting.
Absolutely.
So I want to get into this bar.
So we're now going to go to Uganda, to Jeff Steinberg. We first met him about 7 or 8 years ago. This is his bar from Rowanzori, which is actually a reference to the form of fermentation he takes. But he is fairly rare in actually not just growing beans and fermenting them and crafting them in
Thank you.
Uganda, but also turning them into bars. So he not only grows them, ferments them, and uses different ferment techniques too, but he also then roasts them, conches them, and turns them into bars, and then we ship them over here. So this immediately, you've got a different snap because it's properly conched, in the sense that it's been ground for a very long period of time and washed up and down, so that you can not taste any more of the grinds of the sugar or the grinds of the chocolate inside it. A little bit longer to melt, but once it does melt, you immediately get a little bit more fruit. Starts to release some jam maybe then. Mm-hmm. Now for an 80% though, very similar to the way that your wonderful red grape has absolutely no bitterness or astringency. This is very, very mellow.
Absolutely. Shockingly so, actually. So I think that's an 80%. The fruit it's a slower, gentler build.
Yep.
A little bit more acidity in there for me.
Definitely a
It's
bit.
like a juicier, fruitier kind of taste. Really very good. And I think one of the interesting things for me when it comes to coffee tasting is that the thing you taste before impacts what you taste next. And so as you go from this sort of more floral thing to the coffee, it will be a different experience than going from the slightly softer, fruitier, almost juicier into the coffee.
I think juicy is absolutely right for this, because actually it really brings out the juiciness of the coffee. And I think one of the great things, and one of the reasons why we put together this foundational pack, is that you get most out of flavor when you compare and you contrast. So it's best to do it with a friend, with a mate. And it's also best to have a couple of things on the go at any one time. So that's the reason why we always will have 2 different bars in the pack, but it's also fantastic to be comparing it with something which has a lot of the same values of transparency, a lot of the same aims in terms of trying to get you on the flavor wave, but also you can get 1 and 1 to equal 5.
Absolutely. Like it's for me fascinating just how much these differences bring out differences in the cup.
I think that's exactly it. That's the fun. I mean, the thing about flavor is it's the unique human attribute. So, your average person just doesn't realize that 3 or 4 times a day, when you're having your coffee, when you're having your meal, when you're having your chocolate, you're going to have this amazing sense, which if you just train it a little bit, opens up a whole new world. It's like learning a foreign language. And I think that that's what specialty coffee has pioneered for us in the craft chocolate world. You've really shown how people will value being taken on that journey.
Now, we said you didn't have to brew this as espresso, but of course you can brew this as espresso, which I think makes a really, really interesting sort of tasting comparison moment. So we'll go back and we'll taste these. Now, if you are going to taste espresso, what I would say just before you start, give it a really good stir. After you brew espresso, it kind of separates almost into layers of density. Make sure you give it a stir so you can have 3 or 4 consistent sips. You don't want to taste this too many times, so nice sweetness, nice acidity, nice texture, very easy, lovely clean finish, like very pleasing flavors afterwards. But I am curious what will change if we go back to the Taza. So
let's try the Taza, yeah, see what happens.
So aromatic.
It really brings out the immediacy. It brings out the, that first bit of the journey. It's as you sort of dip your toe in the pool pond or the seawater. It sort of hits you, but it really brings out the sweetness and the aromatics.
Yeah, that really sort of pops in the same sort of way for me.
Yeah, pops brilliantly.
It kind of front loads the experience a little bit,
Yeah.
which is interesting. And I'm curious if this will change that.
Yeah, so whether or not the Rowanzori, the Cocoa Latitudes, the Jeff Steinberg.
This does have nice acidity.
It does.
But that kind of richness, I wonder if that might soften the intensity of the coffee a little bit almost. Oh, that's lovely. That's really a beautiful compliment, actually. It sort of softens things down a little bit, really creates some length in both. Like I'm feeling like I'm getting the length of both right now, in that I can distinctly taste the chocolate and the coffee, and I think they complement each other very well.
You get some sort of stone fruits coming out of both of them now, and you do go and get that. There's a real sort of tanginess to it as it sort of develops. But the coffee, absolutely wonderful in its length.
It's a really fun pairing, actually. It's a really nice
That one
moment
works.
of contrast. I think it works super well.
As a pairing too.
I hope you're enjoying this too. If you haven't had the chance to brew this as filter or espresso, see if you can, borrow someone's brewer if you can, because I think that contrast is just so much fun. The different brew methods, the different chocolates, really very enjoyable. Looking forward to doing this again.
I think we should. I mean, share it. The whole point about coffee, the whole point about craft chocolate is it should be an experience for bringing us together, the basis to partnerships.
Yeah, that was great fun. Thank you.
Thank you.